Hey, what's going on everybody? How's it going? This is Watch, and in this video I'll be doing a direct head-to-head smartphone comparison between two of the most popular smartphones that are going to come out in 2015, and that's the Samsung Galaxy S5 versus the HTC One M9. Now, both of these two smartphones are very similar in terms of overall screen size and internal specifications, but there are some differences that you should know about, especially if you're in the market for a new Android smartphone. So if you're interested in this video, let's get right into this. Now, physically speaking, one of the commonalities of both these two Android-based smartphones is that they're going to be very well made and very well built. Basically, using very high-quality premium materials. For the first time ever, the Samsung Galaxy S lineup of products can certainly compete with the HTC One. The Galaxy S6 has a metal chassis that goes all throughout the phone, and you can see it exposed on the edge of the phone, bordering all around it. And basically, it has a chamfered finish, so it's going to provide adequate grip. And in terms of design, it looks very similar to what we saw on the Note 4. Now, both the front and back of the phone is going to be covered in Gorilla Glass 4, which is great for durability and scratch resistance, but it's going to be definitely a fingerprint magnet and leave a pretty shiny overall finish. Now, the HTC One M9 is going to carry over with the fantastic build quality we've seen in previous line of HTC One phones, so that means a full metal body, and the back of the phone is actually more grippier than last year's more slipperier metal finish, so that's going to be better for ergonomics. At the back of the M9, you'll see that we have a slightly protruding camera, which doesn't stick out near as much compared to the Galaxy S6, which has a camera that sticks out like a sore thumb. Now, looking at the physical dimensions between these two, they're fairly similar in terms of the overall footprint, with the exception that the M9 is slightly taller and the Samsung Galaxy S6 is slightly wider. However, in terms of weight, the GS6 is quite a bit lighter at 138 grams versus about 157 grams on the M9. And furthermore, in terms of thickness, again, very impressively, the GS6, even though it has a massive overall screen size, it only measures about 6.8 millimeters in terms of thickness, versus the new HTC One phone is pretty thick for these days, measuring about 9.6 millimeters. Now let's move on and talk about one of the most important things about any smartphone, and that's the display. And at center stage, the brand new GS6 is going to have a fantastic one. It's going to be 5.1-inch display versus about the 5-inch display on the HTC One M9. Now, in terms of resolution, we're going to have a quad HD resolution, 2560 by 1440 on the GS6 versus a full 1080p screen on the HTC. In terms of PPI count, again, with that higher overall resolution and pretty much exact same screen size, we have a much higher count, about 577 PPI versus about 441 PPI on the HTC One. In terms of screen technology, the Samsung is going to be using their Super AMOLED OLED technology, so that's going to give you great overall vibrant colors and deep blacks. Furthermore, in terms of the maximum brightness, both displays are going to be fairly comparable and very usable for using in outdoor brightly lit conditions. Now, when it comes to the clarity factor, because we have the Quad HD display on the GS6, is going to look like something that has completely no pixels, and it's going to be a little bit more immersive, although in most cases a 1920 by 1080 screen is still very, very sharp, very, very clear. I don't think there's going to be a night-and-day difference between the two. For me personally, I always love to have more pixels, more capabilities, but in an everyday scenario, I don't think it's going to really change anybody's life to have a Quad HD display over a full HD display, especially at the 5-inch screen size. Now, one of the cool things about getting one of the HTC One phones is that they come with great front-facing external speakers, and even though Samsung has improved their external speakers quite a bit from the last year's model, I don't think it's still going to compete with the ones that we'll find on the HTC One M9. Now, let's move on and talk about the internal specifications of both of these two premium Android smartphones. Now, in terms of the HTC One M9, it's going to ship with the brand new Qualcomm chip. We're talking about the Snapdragon 810 processor. That's actually an 8-core processor comprised of 2 quad cores, one clocked about 1.5 gigahertz, the other one clocked about 2 gigahertz, and it's fairly similar to the Exynos 7420 processor we have shipping worldwide on the GS6, which is again comprised of 2 quad core CPUs, one clocked about 1.5 gigahertz, the other one clocked about 2.1 gigahertz. So expect to see very similar overall performance when it comes to both multi-threaded and single-threaded applications. And in terms of RAM, we both have 3 gigabytes of RAM, so great in terms of multitasking capabilities. And again, once we have both phones on hand, we'll definitely put them through the paces and see which one comes out on top in terms of CPU and overall speed performance. Now, in terms of the internal memory capabilities, unfortunately, the new GS6 does not have user expandable memory, so no micro SD expansion slot, but thankfully the HTC One M9 has that, which is fantastic. So you're basically going to have to choose from the 32, 64, and 128 gigabyte models on the GS6 to basically choose what memory configuration is right for you, but you have some versatility on the HTC One, which is nice to see. Now let's move on and talk about the cameras that come in both of these two smartphones. Now looking at the front-facing side, we have an ultra-pixel sensor on the HTC One M9, similar technology that we found on last year's M8, just moved to the front. Basically 4 megapixel stills and 1080p video. We have a 5 megapixel stills capabilities on the GS6. It's also going to have an ultra wide-angle lens, so that's going to be really good. I'm suspecting very similar overall look to the Note 4, which had a fantastic front-facing camera. Now, taking a look at the rear-facing camera, we're going to have a 16 megapixel sensor on the GS6 versus a 20.7 megapixel sensor on the HTC One M9, and that's a pretty big departure from last year's M8, which just had a 4 megapixel ultra sensor. They've ditched that, put that at the front, and now we have kind of like a Sony sensor on the HTC One M9. And in most cases, the early reviews say that it's not very good in terms of low light. I'm sure detail wise it's going to be fairly good, but we'll have to see in real life on how it does compared to the GS6, which not only has a fantastic lens on it, a brand new optics at f1.9 maximum aperture, great for low light and getting kind of shallow depth of field, but you have optical stabilization, so that's going to be very versatile in taking videos and photos. Now, in terms of video, we have basically 4K at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second at 720p on both cameras. So again, stay tuned for our full review to see how these two cameras stack up against each other. Now, the very last thing that we're going to talk about is the overall battery performance of these two smartphones. Now, one of the interesting things is that for the first time ever, our Samsung Galaxy S6 does not have a removable battery, so you can't access the battery at the back and replace it as you go along, a feature that a lot of Samsung Galaxy users loved, and unfortunately that's not going to be the case. We do have a 2550 milliamp hour battery, which is smaller than the 2840 milliamp hour battery we have on the HTC One M9, and certainly in terms of battery performance, I would imagine that the HTC One with the lower overall screen resolution of 1080p and the higher overall battery is going to give you a little bit better battery performance than the Samsung. But again, we'll have to see in real life to see whether that is true or not. But Samsung does have some clever technology to minimize battery use when you're not using it. OLED screens are generally a little bit more efficient than traditional LED backlit displays because they emit their own light. And that new Exynos 7420 processor is supposed to be a lot more efficient when it comes to power resources than last year's Exynos processor and the Snapdragon 801 chip that we found on the GS5. Now, it's not all bad news. We do have some new capabilities on the GS6 when it comes to fast charging mode, so very similar technology as we've seen in the Note lineup of products. So as long as you're using a high voltage adapter that comes with the phone, you can basically get a 50% charge within 25 or 30 minutes or so, and that works really well. We do also have a wireless charging capabilities, which is fantastic. Support for both PMA and Qi wireless charging pads, which is quite fantastic. The HTC M9, because of its metal overall back, it can't actually support wireless charging, which is kind of unfortunate, but you do have fast charging mode, and basically you get 60% in 30 minutes charge time, which is quite fantastic. So both phones have fast charging capabilities, but we do have wireless capabilities on the GS6, which a lot of people do like, but we do have a larger overall battery and probably better battery performance on the M9 compared to the GS6. So both phones have certain advantages and disadvantages when it comes to battery life. Again, we're gonna have to see how they do throughout the day when you're using it on a regular basis. And again, stay tuned for our full hands-on comparison where we'll determine which battery lasts longer. But on that, guys, that's really it. Make sure to check out some of our other comparisons on our channel. I recently did the GS6 versus the iPhone 6. And again, we're going to have the GS6 on our hands soon when it becomes available in April. And I think the HTC One is going to release any time now. So we're definitely doing our best to get our hands on it so we can do a full-on comparison between all of the latest and greatest smartphones that are available right now. So definitely make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video. And thanks again for watching.